She merely offered refuge to a starving boy at her mountain cabin door. But 7 years later, when the preacher asked if anyone opposed their union, the entire congregation fell into stunned silence as Bound Carter claimed her as his wife. What began as a simple act of mercy would become the most controversial love story the territory had ever witnessed. The wind howled through the pine trees as Cora Maddox heard the desperate knocking at her cabin door. Through the foggy window, she could barely make out the silhouette of someone small and frail, hunched against the biting cold. Her hand hesitated on the wooden latch. Living alone in these remote mountains for 3 years since her husband's passing, she had learned to be wary of strangers. But something about the weak, rhythmic knocking made her heart clench, recognizing true desperation. She pulled open the heavy door and gasped. A boy no older than 17 swayed on her porch. His clothes hung in rags, his face gaunt with hunger, his lips blue from the icy air. Snow clung to his dark hair and his eyes held the vacant stare of someone who had been walking for days without food or proper shelter. "Please, ma'am," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the wind. "I haven't eaten in 4 days. I'll work for just a piece of bread." Cora felt her maternal instincts surge, overriding her caution. Without another word, she stepped aside and waved him into the warmth of her cabin. The boy stumbled inside, his legs barely able to support him. She caught him by the arm as he nearly collapsed, feeling how bony he had become beneath his tattered coat. "Sit by the fire," she ordered gently, guiding him to the wooden chair beside her stone hearth. "What's your name, son?" "Bound Carter, ma'am. I've been traveling since my folks died of the fever. Had nowhere to go." As Cora moved to prepare food, she noticed how he looked at her modest cabin with admiration rather than judgment. Most travelers who ended up at her door seemed disappointed by her simple furnishings and isolated location, but this boy's eyes held genuine gratitude as if her small home was a palace to him. She served thick stew in a bowl and watched him eat with careful, measured bites, despite his obvious hunger. He had manners, she realized. Someone had raised him well before tragedy struck his family. "You can stay the night?" she found herself saying. "The storm is worsening and you're not fit to travel." Bound looked up from his bowl, tears mixing with the melted snow on his cheeks. "Thank you, ma'am. I promise I won't be a bother." But as Cora watched him warm by her fire, she had no idea what a bother this act of kindness would bring. For what she thought was temporary charity would soon become something the mountain community could never accept. Bound awoke the next morning to find Cora already moving quietly about the cabin, preparing breakfast. He had slept better than he had in months, wrapped in warm blankets by the dying embers of the fire. But as full consciousness returned, so did his shame at being a burden to this kind woman. "Ma'am, I ought to be going," he said, slowly sitting up. "You've already done more than enough for a stranger." Cora turned from the stove, her calloused hands holding a plate of eggs and biscuits. "Not until you've got your strength back. Look at you, boy. You're naught but skin and bones." He wanted to protest, but the aroma of real food made his stomach clench with desperate hunger. As he ate, Cora studied him with the calculating eye of someone accustomed to making practical decisions. She saw potential in his lean frame, intelligence in his careful manners, and something more that made her heart ache with unexpected purpose. "You said you'd work for food," she said finally. "I could use some help with the spring planting. My husband used to handle the heavier chores, and I've been struggling alone." Bound's eyes lit up with relief. "Yes, ma'am. I know farming and I'm good with my hands. I can fix things, chop wood, tend to animals, whatever you need." But what Cora hadn't expected was how naturally they would fall into a rhythm together. Bound proved to be everything he promised, and more. He mended the sagging fences with skill beyond his years. He chopped enough firewood to last through the next winter and even managed to convince her old stubborn mule to cooperate. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire while Cora mended clothes and Bound carved small wooden figures. Their conversations were easy, comfortable. He told her about his family's homestead, his dreams of having land of his own someday. She shared memories of her late husband, tales of the hard mountain winters and the brief, beautiful summers. Weeks turned into months, and what had begun as temporary charity became something neither of them had planned. Bound no longer slept by the fireplace but had built a small lean-to attached to the cabin. Yet he still took his meals with Cora, still helped her with every chore, still looked at her with gratitude that had slowly transformed into something deeper. The trouble was, Bown was no longer the desperate, half-starved boy who had knocked on her door. He was growing into a man before her eyes, his shoulders broadening with good food and hard work, his voice deepening, his manner becoming more confident. And Cora found herself noticing these changes in ways that both confused and frightened her. One evening, as they watched the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple, Bown turned to her with an expression she couldn't decipher. "Cora," he said softly, using her given name for the first time. "I've been thinking about something and I need to tell you before I lose my nerve." Cora's heart hammered against her ribs as she waited for Bown's words. In the fading light, his face looked older, more serious than she had ever seen it. The boy who had arrived at her door was gone, replaced by someone whose steady gaze made her feel things she thought had died with her husband. "I want to stay," he said simply. "Not just for the season or until I find another place. I want to build a life here with you." The words hung between them like smoke from the dying fire. Cora felt the air leave her lungs, torn between the warmth spreading through her chest and the cold voice of reason that whispered of decency, of what folks would say, of the 28 years that separated them. "Bown, you're still young. You should find someone your own age, start your own family." He shook his head, his jaw set with a determination that reminded her he was no longer the helpless boy she had rescued. "I know what I want, Cora. These months with you have been the happiest of my life. You saved me from more than just starvation. You gave me a home, a purpose, a reason to wake each morning." But their conversation was cut short by the sound of approaching horses. Through the trees they could see lanterns swinging in the gloom, and Cora felt her stomach drop with dread. Visitors to her remote cabin were rare, and they never came after dark unless something was wrong. 3 men emerged from the shadows, Preacher Williams from the Valley settlement along with 2 of the town's prominent citizens. Their faces were grim in the lantern light, and Cora immediately understood their visit was not a social call. "Good evening, Mrs. Maddox," Preacher Williams said stiffly. "We need to speak with you about your living arrangements." Bown positioned himself protectively closer to Cora, his hand instinctively moving to the axe handle leaning against the porch railing. "Is there a problem here, son?" "You're the problem," said Marcus Fletcher, the self-proclaimed moral authority of the settlement. "Word has gotten around about you living up here with a widowed woman. Folks are talking, and it's not the kind of talk that reflects well on anyone." Cora felt her cheeks burn with shame and anger. "What Bown and I do on my own property is no concern of yours or anyone else's. When it affects the moral character of our community, it becomes our concern," Preacher Williams retorted. "The boy needs to be on his way, find proper lodging with a family, or take up residence in town. This arrangement is indecent." But as the men laid out their demands, neither Cora nor Bown was prepared for what they would discover about the settlement's true motivations, because someone had been watching them far longer than they realized, and what they had witnessed would force a choice neither of them saw coming. Preacher Williams reached into his coat and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. In the flickering lantern light, Cora could see it was covered with neat handwriting. Her blood ran cold as she realized what it might contain. "Someone has been keeping a detailed record of your daily activities," the preacher said grimly. "Times of when the boy enters and leaves your cabin. Instances of inappropriate familiarity, shared meals, private conversations. Him working shirtless in your sight." Bown stepped forward, his young face flushed with anger. "Who has been spying on us? Show yourselves if you have accusations to make." Marcus Fletcher exchanged a significant glance with the third man, Samuel Reed, who had remained silent until then. Reed cleared his throat nervously before speaking. "It was my wife, Helen. She's been concerned about the moral influence this situation might have on our own children. Felt it was her Christian duty to document what she observed during her herb-gathering trips." Cora felt violated and furious. Helen Reed's herb-gathering was clearly a pretense to spy on them, twisting innocent moments into something sordid. Every kind gesture, every shared laugh, every moment of genuine companionship had been distorted into evidence of indecency. "You want to know what Helen truly saw?" Cora's voice trembled with rage. She saw a decent young man helping an aging widow survive in these mountains. She saw kindness and hard work and mutual respect. If your minds are so poisoned that you see sin where there is only charity, that speaks more about you than about us. But Preacher Williams wasn't finished. He unfolded the paper completely, revealing page after page of observations. According to this record, the boy has been living here for 8 months. 8 months, Mrs. Maddox. That goes far beyond temporary charity. Bown reached for Cora's hand, a gesture that made all 3 men stiffen with disapproval. We've done nothing wrong. Cora saved my life and I've worked to earn my keep. If that threatens your community in some way, maybe you ought to examine what kind of community you're running. Samuel Reed's face hardened. Boy, you'd do well to mind your tone. We are trying to help you avoid a situation that could ruin your reputation permanently. And if we refuse your help? Cora asked, though she dreaded the answer. The 3 men exchanged glances again, and Preacher Williams folded the paper carefully before returning it to his coat. Then we will be compelled to take this matter to the territorial authorities. A formal complaint about moral corruption could result in legal consequences neither of you wants to face. As the men mounted their horses and disappeared into the darkness, Cora and Bown stood in stunned silence. They had been delivered an ultimatum. But what they didn't know was that Helen Reed had witnessed something more during her secret observations. Something she hadn't shared with the men. Something that would change everything. 3 days passed in tense silence after the men's visit. Cora found herself jumping at every sound, wondering if Helen Reed was still lurking in the woods with her notebook and poisonous interpretations. Bown worked with grim determination, but she could see the anger simmering beneath his calm exterior. On the 4th morning, an unexpected visitor arrived. Helen Reed herself stood at their door, but instead of the self-righteous arrogance Cora expected, the woman's face was pale and troubled. I need to speak with both of you, Helen said quietly, about what I didn't tell my husband and the others. Cora's heart sank. What else could this woman have twisted into scandal? But as Helen stepped into the cabin and sat heavily in the offered chair, her demeanor was nothing like the vengeful spy Cora had imagined. I've been watching you for months, Helen began, her voice barely above a whisper. At first, yes, I was looking for indecency. A young man and a widow living together seemed wrong, but what I truly saw confused me. Bown and Cora exchanged bewildered glances as Helen continued. I saw you nurse him through the fever last month when he fell ill from working in the rain. I saw you teaching him to read better by lamplight. I saw him give you his own blanket when yours tore and sleep cold himself. I saw love, real love, not lust or indecency, but the kind of deep caring my own marriage never had. Cora felt tears prick her eyes. Then why did you report us? Helen's hands wrung in her lap. Because my husband expected me to find something bad. Because admitting I saw something beautiful would mean acknowledging what's missing in my own life. Because sometimes it's easier to destroy what you can't have than to face your own emptiness. But Helen wasn't finished with her confession. She reached into her satchel and pulled out another notebook, this one thicker than the first. This holds what I truly saw, every act of kindness, every moment of genuine affection, every proof that what you have is precious and rare. I wrote it down because I wanted to remember that such love was possible. Bown leaned forward intently. Why are you telling us this now? Because last night I overheard my husband and the others making plans. They aren't just going to report you to the territorial authorities. They are coming back tomorrow with more men and they're going to force you apart permanently. The weight of her words settled upon them like a shroud. Helen continued, her voice urgent now. Samuel thinks if they can declare you mentally unsound, Cora, they can have you committed to the territorial asylum. They believe any woman who would live with a younger man must be suffering from female hysteria. Cora's blood turned to ice. She had heard stories of women disappearing into such institutions never to return. And Bown, Helen added, they plan to arrest you for taking advantage of a vulnerable widow. Marcus Fletcher has already spoken with the sheriff. As Helen prepared to leave, she turned back with one final, devastating revelation. There's something else you need to know, Helen said, her voice dropping to barely a whisper. The real reason they want to separate you has nothing to do with morality. Cora felt her stomach clench with dread. What do you mean? Your late husband filed a mining claim on this land before he passed. Marcus Fletcher found the documentation at the territorial office last month. There's silver in these mountains, Cora, possibly a great deal of it. The revelation hit like a physical blow. Cora sank into her chair. Pieces of a puzzle she hadn't known existed suddenly falling into place. Her husband had mentioned testing some rocks near the creek, but she had thought it was just idle curiosity. "If they can declare you mentally unsound," Helen continued, "the land would likely be sold to pay for your institutional care. Marcus has already positioned himself to buy it for a fraction of its worth." Bound's hands clenched into fists. "So this entire moral crusade is about stealing your land." "That's exactly it. And if you're in jail for exploitation, you can't protect her or contest the sale." After Helen left, promising to delay the men as much as possible, Cora and Bound sat in stunned silence by the fire. Everything they thought they knew about their situation had changed. They faced not moral judgment but calculated greed disguised as righteousness. "We have to leave," Bound said. "Tonight. If we're not here when they come, they can't force anything." But Cora shook her head firmly. "This is my home. My husband is buried on this land. I will not be driven out by thieves and hypocrites." "Then what do you propose we do? Fight them off with an axe and a common rifle?" Cora stood and walked to the window, looking out at the mountains that had been her refuge and sanctuary for 3 years. In the distance, she could see lights from the settlement where the men were likely planning their destruction at this very moment. "There's one thing they can't touch," she said slowly, an idea forming in her mind. "One thing that would make their accusations meaningless and their legal claims impossible." Bound joined her at the window. "What is it?" "Marriage. If we are legally wed, they can't claim you're taking advantage of me. They can't declare me mentally unsound for making a rational decision. And as my husband, you would have legal standing to protect the land." The word hung between them, heavy with implications neither had fully considered until this moment. Bound studied her profile in the moonlight, searching for any sign of doubt or fear. "Are you proposing marriage to me, Cora Maddox?" She turned to face him, and in her eyes, he saw determination mixed with something that made his heart race. "I am proposing we save our lives," Cora said, but her voice carried a warmth that contradicted her practical words. "Though I won't pretend there aren't other feelings involved." Bound reached for her hands, his young face serious in the firelight. "I've loved you for months, Cora, not as a boy grateful for charity, but as a man who found his place in the world. If you'll have me, to hell with the age difference and the scandal." She looked into his eyes and saw not the desperate, starving young man who had knocked on her door, but a strong, capable man who had chosen her just as she had chosen him. "Then we do it tonight before they can stop us." But finding someone to perform the ceremony on such short notice seemed impossible until Bound remembered something Helen had mentioned. "Old man Thomas Morrison, the trapper who lives up by Eagle Creek, is a retired circuit preacher, isn't he? If he's still alive and willing to travel in the dark," Cora said, "he's our only chance." They spent the next hour preparing. Cora pulled out her one good dress, dark blue with tiny pearl buttons, while Bound cleaned himself as best he could with cold water and strong lye soap. In the lantern light, they looked like what they were. Two people about to make the most important decision of their lives under the worst possible circumstances. The ride to Thomas Morrison's cabin took them over treacherous mountain trails in complete darkness. More than once their horses stumbled on loose rocks or hidden roots, but when they finally reached the old trapper's door, they found him not only alive, but surprisingly alert for a man well past his 70s. "Marriage, you say?" Thomas peered at them through thick spectacles. "At this hour, there must be some powerful urgency driving you young folks." "There is," Cora said simply. "People want to separate us for their own gain. This is our only protection." Thomas studied them both with the keen eye of someone who had seen all manner of human desperation in his long life. "Well, I've seen stranger things in these mountains, and if two people want to make a legal commitment to each other, I reckon that's their right." The ceremony was brief, but heartfelt. In the lamplight of Thomas's small cabin, with only a house dog as witness, Cora Maddox and Bound Carter spoke vows that made them husband and wife before God's eyes and territorial law. "You may kiss your bride," Thomas said with a gentle smile. When Bound's lips touched hers, Cora felt a warmth she hadn't experienced since her first husband's passing. This wasn't desperate gratitude or calculated protection. This was real love, born of months of shared hardship and genuine companionship. But as they prepared to ride home as a married couple, Thomas handed them an official marriage certificate and spoke words that froze them. You'd best hurry back to your place. I saw riders headed up that way an hour ago. They looked to be in a mighty rush, and they carried more than just lanterns. Cora and Bound rode hard through the darkness, the marriage certificate safely tucked into Bound's jacket pocket. As they neared their cabin, they could see exactly what Thomas had warned them about. 6 men on horseback surrounding their home, torches casting dancing shadows into the trees. Marcus Fletcher's voice echoed through the clearing. "Mrs. Maddox, we know you're in there. Come out and face what needs to be done." But when Cora and Bound emerged from the tree line on horseback, the men turned with surprise. Marcus Fletcher's confident expression wavered as he realized his carefully planned ambush had gone awry. "Gentlemen," Cora called out, her voice steady despite her pounding heart, "I'd like you to meet my husband, Bound Carter." The words hit the group like a thunderclap. Preacher Williams spurred his horse forward, his face contorted with disbelief. "That's impossible. No preacher in the territory would perform such a ceremony." Bound reached into his jacket and held up the official marriage certificate, the territorial seal clearly visible in the torchlight. "Thomas Morrison might disagree with you. The marriage is legal and recorded." Marcus Fletcher's mask of righteousness finally slipped completely. "You can't do this. That land belongs to the community. You have no right to..." "To what?" Cora interrupted. "To marry whom I choose? To keep my own property? Or are you finally ready to admit this was never about morality?" Samuel Reed shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. "Marcus, perhaps we should reconsider. If they're legally married..." "Quiet, Samuel," Fletcher snapped. Then he turned to Cora with undisguised hatred. "You think a piece of paper changes anything? I'll find another way to get what's mine." But Bound stepped forward, no longer the frightened boy who had first knocked on Cora's door. "That sounds like a threat, Fletcher, and threatening my wife on our own land. Well, that might just interest the territorial marshal when I file my report on your attempted theft." The other men began to exchange nervous glances, clearly realizing they had been manipulated into Fletcher's scheme. One by one, they turned their horses away from the confrontation, leaving Fletcher increasingly isolated. Preacher Williams was the last to leave. "Mrs. Carter," he said stiffly, "I hope you know what you've done." "I know exactly what I've done," Cora retorted. "I chose love over fear and happiness over other people's judgment." As the men disappeared into the darkness, Cora and Bound stood together in front of their cabin, truly husband and wife for the first time. The boy who had arrived hungry and desperate had grown into a man who could protect what they had built together. 5 years later, when the silver mine made them rich beyond imagining, visitors to the Carter homestead often commented on the obvious devotion between the couple. Cora had found love when she thought her life was over, and Bound had discovered that sometimes the greatest treasures aren't found in the ground, but in the hearts of those brave enough to follow their own path. If you enjoyed this exciting story from the American Old West, don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories like this one. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any of our narratives that blend love, courage, and adventure. Your support means everything to us and helps us continue bringing you these heartwarming tales. Until next time.